It's coming up to 12 minutes to the hour. You're listening, of course, to Paris Live PM on Radio France International. Well, we're almost 1 week on from elections in Britain that saw Prime Minister Theresa May lose her majority and weaken her position in upcoming Brexit negotiations. While May will need to form a coalition with a right-wing party in Northern Ireland if she hopes to govern, these elections have actually moved Britain closer to a return of two-party politics. The Conservatives and the opposition Labour Party took just over 82% of the vote between them. That's the highest in 47 years. Now, Britain's third party, the Liberal Democrats, had mixed fortunes. Gains were made, but the party suffered some tough losses, including former leader Nick Clegg, whose seat went to Labour. While the results are difficult to interpret, it's hard to say who the winners and the losers are. What we can say for sure is that the British electorate is divided. With us to discuss this is Raphaela Kitson-Pantano, the head of communications and PR for the Lib Dems here in France. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, it looks as if the centre of British politics has disappeared. The electorate's become even more polarised. And I want to talk about this big divide to start off with. Should we have seen it coming?
I wouldn't go as far as to say that the centre has disappeared, but effectively the electorate is polarised. I think we could have seen it coming. In coalitions, traditionally, small parties do tend to get smashed. And under Cameron and Miliband, the Labour and Tory parties tended to go more towards the centre. And so effectively, with the coalition happening the way it did, the centre was fragilised, the Liberal Democrats were fragilised, and now we've had a new election. Effectively, the electorate is polarised. So to some extent, with high insight, we should have seen it coming. But then again, when the Lib Dems did go into the coalition, we had 57 seats, and nobody could have foreseen that we would have lost so many.
So in these elections, there was a genuine expectation that the Lib Dems could capitalise on this gap in the centre. We're a week on now from the elections. There must have been some soul searching going on. I mean, have you figured out, where the strategy went wrong?
Yes, I think the Liberal Democrats are very respectful and receptive to the vote of the people. And I think they have been thinking about what happened in the last 7 years. I think that the big issue is one of communication, of poor or perhaps miscommunication. If you look at data, research shows that over 75% of people wrongly attributed key Liberal Democrat policies to the Conservatives. And so this is down to the fact that we were not able to successfully promote where we did well and how we managed to change policy and influence the Tory government. One example of this is the whole issue around first past the post, when we had the debate about it and tried to push forward the proportional representation. Unfortunately, people thought that the Liberal Democrats were only trying to push their own agenda, and nobody saw that this was an attempt to enhance democracy. And as a result, 2/3 of the people voted against it, much to the disappointment of democracy.
So this first past the post system, it in theory at least favours a single party majority in politics. There have been complaints that it distorts the political system. And in these elections, more people actually voted to the left of the Conservatives, yet it's the Conservative Party that's looking to form a government. Smaller parties would be better off under proportional representation. Is this a model that you would prefer?
Absolutely. And it's not just smaller parties that would be better off. I think the whole process of democracy would be better off. I think that today we can see it. We are in a situation where we have two very strong parties. We have a hung parliament. And what we have achieved is political instability, which is certainly not, I believe, what the people of Britain wanted. I think if we did have proportional representation, then the democratic process would be enhanced and people would be able to voice more effectively their opinion.
Now, coalitions are actually much rarer in British politics than they are in mainland Europe. Hung parliaments, they're more common in countries like the Netherlands, Belgium, in Germany. So do you think there's an irony here that British politics is perhaps becoming more European?
Actually, I think that the UK is perhaps not on the continent, but it is a European country, and no Brexit can change that.
That's it.
That's it.
Okay.
We are a European country, and I think that we're just one of the 27, 28 different models of politics and governance.
And I suppose that's a natural response coming from the communications person from the Liberal Democrats, which is a pro-European party and has always maintained that position. Absolutely. The Lib Dems said that they weren't just fighting an election, they were also fighting Brexit. Looking at the numbers, just 14% of Remainers backed the Lib Dems last week. So most Remainers actually voted for the pro-Brexit parties. Should the Lib Dems be doing more to rethink its Brexit position?
I think our Brexit position is very clear. I think, again, we maybe haven't been so good at expressing it and communicating it to people beyond our own party. I think the main flaw today is that people think the Liberal Democrats are still on their position of we're against Brexit and we should have another referendum on Brexit. That's not at all what we want. We've heard the people of Britain. We understand that Brexit is the way the country wants to go forward. What we do want, however, is to give the people of Britain the right to give their opinion on the deal that will be struck. And interestingly, Tim Farron this afternoon called upon Theresa May to set up a cross-party committee in order to involve not just her party members, but people from other parties to discuss this, because it's an issue that does transcend parties, and there are pro and anti-Brexit in all the parties.
Okay, and now that Theresa May has lost that majority in Parliament, Parliament will play a greater role, presumably, in the Brexit negotiations. Theresa May will have to work out how to get a cross-party consensus on immigration control, on the single market access, etc. So what's the Lib Dems' plan in terms of being a constructive opposition force?
The Lib Dems have 12 MPs. But the Lib Dems also have 12 MEPs, and those MEPs are part of our political landscape. And so I believe that the Lib Dems will use their diplomatic skills to support the anti-Brexit in the Labour and Tory parties in order to make sure that the Brexit is as soft as possible and is in the interests of the people of Britain as much as possible.
So given that the single market access is now back on the agenda, would it be fair to say that whichever government the UK ends up with, this is now the end of a hard Brexit?
Now, I've got to be careful in answering that question because I don't want to express my wishful thinking. Of course, I would love to answer yes. This is the end of a hard Brexit. Whether it is or it isn't, I don't know. What is clear is that both in the Labour and the Tory party, there are people who are definitely against it. Theresa May is going to have to play with the Tories in Scotland, for example. There are 13 seats in Scotland that went to the Tories, and they are absolutely against a hard Brexit. So we talk a lot about the DUP wanting a soft Brexit, but actually, you know, there's also the Scottish, there's also the people within her own party that are against this. So I think there are a lot of people against hard Brexit. However, Theresa May yesterday, when she addressed the 1922 committee, she said, I got us in this mess, I will get us out of it, speaking very much about herself. And one would wonder to what extent she is able to listen to her own party members and to people across party.
So the Lib Dems, they very quickly ruled out a coalition with Theresa May. She's now being forced to cobble together this uneasy coalition with the DUP, a right-wing hardline party in Northern Ireland. This is a huge humiliation for her. I'm sure you will agree. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are, practically speaking, on how this coalition will work and if it can work.
I don't know that there will be one. I wonder if it won't be more an issue of confidence and supply. If you look back in history, the relationship between the DUP party and the Conservatives has never been ideal. I think the worst was probably in 1985 when Margaret Thatcher was involved in the English-Irish agreement, which was going to give the Irish government an advisory role or a look at the affairs of Northern Ireland. I think that the DUP doesn't have much to gain in going into a coalition. They have a lot to gain in negotiating more funding, a softer Brexit, in order to give confidence and supply. So I don't think a small party has to gain from a coalition. I don't think the DUP would do it.
Okay, and I've just got one final question for you, just briefly. It's about identity. If anything, these elections showed deep divisions within the British electorate. And there was a lot of talk about protecting British identity amongst the Brexiteers. You've got an interesting position because you have an English mother, an Italian father, but you were born in France. How do you identify yourself?
Absolutely 100% European. And I'm also a scientist, so I'm a doctor of genetics. And when I'm stuck, for example, last night there was a football match. If you had to ask me, was I in favour of France or in favour of Britain, I'd say I'm in favour of the winner. And really my identity is being a European scientist.
Okay, well, and my thanks there to European scientist Raphaela Kitson-Pantano from the Lib Dems here in France.